The beginning of June will mark 6 months since Toronto Mayor John Tory was officially sworn into office. Joining us now for a report card on what he's accomplished in that time, John Lawrence, senior editor at Spacing and co-editor of The Ward, The Life and Loss of Canada's First Immigrant Enclave. Jonathan Goldsby is here, City Hall reporter at Now Magazine, and Adil Barale, urban affairs columnist also with Spacing Magazine, and it's good to have you three here for a look at how John Tory's done so far. So let's start there. Adil, what do you think?
Kind of mixed, you know. I think there's some promising things that he's doing, like taking action on the poverty reduction strategy and allocating money to that. I'm very impressed with the pay program that he's working on to address youth unemployment, as well as some of the other works around reducing the gaps that happens in the city, and speaking upon a theme of uniting Toronto after the Ford era, right? So those are great things that he's doing, but then there's also some questionable policy decisions that he's making.
Hold off on those for the moment. John?
Well, I, like a lot of reporters, appreciate the fact that sanity has returned to City Hall, and you can actually engage in debates and discussions about issues and not spend all your time chasing, you know, this weird character around City Hall. So that's a good thing, and I mean, Tory's a completely different person, so he's brought that back. I think that there are really serious long-term issues around the amount of money that he's pledging to spend on very big projects, and so my concern is that you know, at the end of John Tory's first term, we're going to have a huge bill that we don't really understand how to pay.
Jonathan, how's he doing?
The fact that City Hall has a very long, difficult learning curve has really sort of shown itself. I mean, I believe he's the first person to be elected mayor of Toronto without having previously served on council since Oliver Aiken Howland about 115 or so years ago. And I mean, there's definitely something to be said for someone coming from outside to shake things up or to change things, but it also means that it takes a lot longer to rev things up. And he's definitely in an ongoing process of learning, and part of that is actually being disabused of a lot of the notions or superficial ideas he may have had while he was a talk show host. It's actually learning, well, things aren't necessarily as simple as they were when he was on News Talk 1010.
Okay, well, let's establish the fact that that's not the only job he had before he became the mayor. He was the opposition leader at Queen's Park before that. He'd run for mayor once before. Been a senior advisor to a premier for a long time.
Undoubtedly, he has an impressive political resume, but when I asked him a couple months ago, which do you think better prepared you for the job of mayor, your 5 years on News Talk 1010 or your 5 years as leader of the opposition or leader of the PCs, he said that the radio job actually prepared him better. And it's not a bad answer, and I appreciate he was honest with it, but I think it's useful to look at a lot of his politics and policies and the way he's moving forward in light of that more than in light of his time in the province.
Is the calm after Ford his most significant accomplishment so far? John, what do you think?
I don't think it's his most significant accomplishment, but I think that it's the most visible change. And, you know, I think it was inevitable, whoever got elected mayor other than Doug Ford. So it feels like a different game. It feels like the game it used to be. I mean, Tory's set in motion a lot of things that are going to take a long time to gestate. And so, in a sense, it's a little bit too early to judge, but you know, we can see where things are trending, and you know, there are questions, and I don't think he's on a honeymoon at this point anymore.
You don't think he's on a honeymoon?
No, I think that the honeymoon, I think that he's, you know, he gets goodwill because he's, you know, he's legible. He's something, you know, you see him, you know that he's a mayor and he's not running away from television cameras. But I think that he's, you know, he's in the middle of some really, you know, tough policy debates.
Last poll I saw showed his approval rating at 72%. I mean, if that's not a honeymoon.
That's sort of a default, like, yeah, it's okay, shrug. I mean, that's a good result, and
there are politicians who would give their eye teeth for that kind of a number.
No, but for a municipal politician, for a mayor, especially the one this early in his term, like that's a good approval rating, but it's not an extraordinary approval rating. I mean, in fact, I'd argue that your interview with him was actually arguably a turning point in terms of maybe marking the end of a honeymoon phase. I actually haven't seen him that defensive or feeling that on the defense, seeming on the defensive since the election, which is kind of remarkable.
I would also question what we're comparing that to, right? So 72% vis-a-vis what? Is it vis-a-vis Rob Ford? Because that's not a high bar to set up, to aspire to go over. So I'm always curious as to what we're polling for when we say he has a 72% approval rating.
Well, would you acknowledge that if his approval rating were at 35% instead of 72%, that would not be a good thing?
Yes.
Right. So the fact that the bar may be lower, but he seems to be jumping over it with room to spare, I mean, he does get credit for that, doesn't he?
Again, what is the aspirations, right? Because I mean, he hasn't started anything significantly yet. And if you're at 35%, that means you're doing some stuff that is very controversial or things that a lot of people do not agree with.
Or you're a big screw up.
Or you're a big screw up, exactly. So it's just, I think it's too soon to be saying he's doing great.
Okay. Well, let's follow up on one of the issues that we talked about during our conversation with the mayor, starting with carding. Here's what Samuel Getachew had to say in the Huffington Post about this. He says, by voicing his support of carding, Tory has given a slap in the face to the black community as well as to the ideals of a civilized and moderate society. Too bad we do not have recall legislation to reject bad politicians like him in Canada. Get off the fence, Samuel. Tell us what you really think. How do you think he's handled the carding issue so far?
Not well. And I hear where Samuel's coming at with that quote, but I think, you know, I want to problematize this being a black issue or something that only the black community has issues with. I mean, carding is similar to what happened during the G20 with the Kettleman incident that a lot of Torontonians went through, right? And as you saw with the G20, there were, you know, people who were held accountable to that, and there were reports and audits done. With carding, though, we seem to be debating whether or not this practice has merit just because it happens to marginalize individuals in Toronto and in certain areas of Toronto disproportionately, right? So with Tory's view on carding, I kind of want to ask, you know, will the real John Tory please stand up? Because he says one thing, but then he votes completely opposite. So he's called the practice corrosive, right? And he legitimized the voice of the community saying that this is something we have to reel in, but then approves a policy that is not any different than the status quo.
He said during our interview he wants to reform it. Is that good enough?
Well, I think that, I mean, I think it's a wrong-headed policy, and I think that the, you know, justifications that were put forward, you know, are kind of, it's a compromise. The former Chief Bill Blair wanted it this way. You know, the way I look at it is that if people who looked like me were constantly stopped and asked for personal information on the street, we wouldn't have carding, right? We would have a very different system. But, you know, I'm an empowered person, a middle-class, white professional male, and I don't get stopped while walking. But lots of people in the city do. And I think that, you know, I mean, I acknowledge your point that it's not a racial issue, but, you know, studies have shown, the Star has done a lot of this work, that it disproportionately affects young, you know, visible minority males. And so, you know, he can't sort of have it both ways. He has to, you know, if he acknowledges that it exists, he has to come up with a system which is significantly different than what existed before.
The new black police chief of Toronto supports carding. So is the mayor so far out if he supports it too, admittedly with the reforms he'd like to see take place?
I'm not sure the majority of Torontonians support carding. I mean, it's a fundamental, basic civil rights issue. As you said, it's not specifically a black issue that obviously disproportionately affects some people and some populations more than others. People have the right to be able to go about their business, go about their day, whether walking or driving around the city, without having interaction with police. I mean, if the police are in the middle of a specific investigation of something, I mean, that's a different matter. But here, I mean, beyond even, you know, whether or not it's racist, the fact is they haven't actually demonstrated that it has any efficacy. Like, they haven't actually shown that there's any sort of positive benefit, that anything good comes out of it, that it actually helps investigations beyond broad assertions that it does. I mean, presumably if they had that evidence, hopefully if they had that evidence, they would have brought it out by now, because the conversation, the discussion is moving to a point where reforming it probably isn't adequate anymore.
Their position is crime goes up. If we don't have this tool, crime goes up.
They're going to have to offer some sort of evidence to that effect, because they have it. You're just saying that. And if I may add,
just the way this 2015 policy or procedures that Chief Blair authored came about was the most undemocratic way, right? So we've had public consultation leading up to the 2014 policy that the board put forward, which was a progressive step in the right direction that a lot of people who wanted an end to carding were willing to support, right? And it asked for two main things. One is rights notification, so let people know that they're free to go and this is a voluntary engagement. And the second thing was give them proof of transaction, right? So like when I'm pulled over by an officer for speeding, I get, you know, a piece of paper to show me why I was pulled over. Same thing with carding, right? Why is it that I get told my rights if I'm under arrest, but if I'm engaging with an officer under community engagement, I have to ask for my rights, and I have to know when to ask it and how to ask it. That's a reverse onus that is problematic, but I want to highlight the lack of transparency in how this policy came about, because it was transparent leading up to the 2014 policy, and then they went indoors or in camera with a judge, and then there were backroom dealings, and then we got this 2015 policy, which is completely void of some of the safeguards that we have put in place for respecting charter rights, right? So
the mayor is not only, of course, the mayor, but he's also a member of the Police Services Board.
Yes.
Do you think he will use his influence constructively to put in place the changes you would like to see to the carding policy?
I think he's going to regret being on the board and supporting this policy. I think he's already seen the pressure that is building up from prominent Black members of the community who voted for him, right? And I think this is something he's going to regret, and we'll try to backtrack. But I was hoping for reform. The 2014 policy was reform. It kept carding as it was, so it gave the police what they needed to be effective in communities. But it also safeguarded charter rights for individuals who are engaged in those random stops, right? And the fact that they didn't respect that, and instead we have a policy which has no oversight and it's just maintaining the status quo, but saying that we now have a policy is very unfortunate. And I think the community will continue pushing up until September when they come back to review it.
Okay, let's move on to the second policy, which I talked to the mayor about, and that is his decision as of last week to support the so-called hybrid option for making changes on the Gardiner Expressway. He wants to keep the expressway as opposed to tear it down and turn it into a more, shall we say, boulevard-like integrated piece of the city. And I read a very negative appraisal of his decision from the Globe and Mail, so in the interest of fairness, let's read this out of the Toronto Star. This was its editorial. John Tory has made the right choice. It's not the cheapest option, but its cost is manageable. It has minimal impact on traffic flow, and it would open land for development that isn't available now. Of course, advocates of removing the Gardiner won't be happy with that, but there simply isn't a convincing case that the benefits from replacing this structure with an 8-lane road would outweigh potential drawbacks. Jonathan, who's right on this?
The Globe and Mail is actually correct on this one. I mean, this Toronto Star is being a little misleading. Maybe that was a bit out of context. I mean, we're not talking about removing the entire highway. We're talking about removing a section, the stretch of it east of Jarvis Street. And similarly, you know, the Toronto Star talks about, well, the so-called hybrid option would open up new land for development. Well, yes, but removing it or taking down that portion would open up a great deal more of it. I mean, you made pretty much all of the key points, which is to say, why is he so passionately advocating spending a considerable amount of money, and it is a considerable amount of money. I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference, what he was talking about, there's not a lot of difference in terms of the capital costs of removing it versus tweaking it, but in terms of the long-term maintenance cost over the next 100 years, it's considerably more expensive to maintain it. So why would we spend all that money for the 3% of people who get into the downtown that way, when we could spend that money in any number of other ways that would benefit more people immeasurably?
I don't want to overdo the math here, John, but he did say that at the end of the day, when you make apples-to-apples comparisons, it's a difference of about $100 million, which is not insignificant, but the city's budget is $12 billion, something like that. So $100 million on $12 billion isn't all that much. At the end of the day, you want to make the right choice. Did the mayor make the right choice?
No, I don't believe he made the right choice. I think that he's going against the direction of a lot of major cities where they're bringing down highways, elevated highways and freeways in the middle of the city, because elevated highways and downtowns don't mix. That's one thing. I think that we depend way too much on these traffic modeling studies and the time delays. We're talking periods of 30, 40 years out, and you're saying to individual commuters, well, what your time is going to be 2 or 3 minutes less or 10 minutes less 20 years from now. You could be retired, you could have moved to a different city, you could be dead. These are guesses, and we're using guesswork, basically educated guesswork, to make these big decisions. The other point I'd make about the cost is that when we built the Gardiner in the 1950s, I mean, we thought that it would last for a long time, and now we're facing these huge, repair bills. So who's to say that 60 years from now there won't be huge repair bills that that the engineers who built the new hybrid or this new structure didn't anticipate? I think when you build a big thing, you're going to have to pay for it. You're probably going to have to pay more than you expected for it, and that's the bottom line.
And Dill, this is a mayor who said he has a stack of reports this tall, which he reads. And after agonizing over the issue, he decided the hybrid model was the best way to go. Do you think he made the right call?
Well, I mean, that depends on how he sees it, right? I think oftentimes Mayor Tory likes to be evidence-based and be a practical politician, and yet all the facts weigh to the other side of the issue. So I wonder if his support for the hybrid solution is rather political rather than policy, right? Because I see the expediency of maybe trying to get suburban voters in the next election, or caving into a car demographic or car-dependent demographic. But other than that, I do not see the priorities we're setting as a city when we have magically we can stomach the idea of spending this amount of money 100 years from now to keep this thing up, rather than invest in affordable housing or affordable childcare or other things that we keep waiting on the province or the feds to help us with.
Okay, let's pretend you're a mini version of Toronto City Council right here. Scarborough Subway comes up for a vote. Yay or nay to the current model plan for the Scarborough Subway? Wide shot, please, Mr. Director. You've got it. Hands up. Who votes yay to the current model? Who says this is the wrong approach? We got to go back to either an LRT or something else? Okay, just so we know where you guys are coming from. The mayor, Jonathan, did say, when I put it to him, that if a few councillors change their mind, because this thing only passed by 2 votes in the first place, that council might have to revisit this whole issue. Do you think they should?
It's remarkable how he sort of steps back from a responsibility to control council. And there are good, I mean, once again, there are good things to be said about that, about not caring about how every single thing goes. But on the other hand, there are issues in which leadership would be deeply helpful. And in this case, he seems both to passionately believe in the Scarborough Subway and to be sort of indifferent as to whether or not it actually gets built.
You picked up indifference from the interview?
Well, if he feels that, well, council might go the other way, and I know he has a limited amount of control over city council, that's a type of indifference, and he approaches a number of issues that way.
Okay, maybe I saw it differently than you, but just sort of help me out with this here, because I think what I heard him say was the universe will unfold as it will.
That's sort of a que sera thing, and that's kind of how he approaches a number of different issues, which is sort of like, things will go as they do, as opposed to taking an active role in shaping that.
And you'd like to see him take a more active role in killing the Scarborough Subway?
I would love to see him take. I don't think he would. I think that goes contrary to his own opinion, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that he doesn't jump into every issue. But in certain cases, I think the clarity, City Council would appreciate the clarity from him.
City Council is going to be facing a Scarborough Subway vote again, I think, in the fall, because at numerous steps of its development, it requires some City Hall approval. Can you imagine in the fall Council changing its mind on this issue because A, either the facts have changed, or B, some councillors no longer support what they once did?
Well, I think that the cost is really significant here, and it can't just be viewed in isolation, right? Because we've got like a number of big and expensive long-term infrastructure projects that are moving along. I mean, the mayor wants to build Smart Track. He wants to build the Scarborough Subway. The Scarborough Subway, I did some FOIs on this. The predictions are freedom of information requests. We have Metrolinx officials who expect it to be 40 to 50% more expensive than has been budgeted for.
And it's $3.8 billion right now.
$3.8 billion. So that's like, that's another $1 billion plus. We have the Gardiner. However you want to debate the numbers, it's going to be an extra cost. We have unfunded major projects like the Downtown Relief Line, like the Queens Quay LRT, a whole bunch of other things. So when you start adding all of those things together, you get a big number, and you get a bigger number than a lot of the councillors had sort of bargained for. And what all the city councillors know is that the city has a certain debt ceiling. It can borrow a certain amount of money beyond which it's not legally allowed to borrow money. And they all know that once they get to that ceiling, they can't do new projects. And so I think what's coming is a moment where it's an aha moment where people say, okay, what are we in for, right? It's, you know, and if the thing about the Scarborough subway and all of these big projects is, you know, you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound, and that's going to be a big pound. And I think that's the sort of, I heard an interesting comment about the gardener from a Scarborough councillor, Ron Moser, who, you know, who was sort of balking at the cost. And when you add all of these things together, these are non-trivial problems for council.
Adil, what should Toronto Council do about the Scarborough subway, which so far it's on record as supporting and is prepared to spend $1.8 billion on? What do you think they should do?
Think about my generation, or my children's generation, right? Because I think council and Mayor Tory will not be around maybe to pay the bills when they're due. But these are concerning amounts of money that we will have to come up with. And for me, I don't understand the logic, again, of the Scarborough subway when it does not go in the areas in Scarborough that require transit or that have the numbers to support it. But I'm also of the opinion that we just need to start building something. So I also take issue with the back and forth. But I feel like Toronto is one of the only cities in the world where transit get planned on the back of napkins during, you know, elections by politicians. And I think the Scarborough subway is an example of that, right? This is a populist political decision that was made to win some votes by a demographic in Scarborough who felt entitled to a subway, who did not understand the LRT technology and somehow felt like it would be second class.
And politicians pandered to that.
And politicians pandered to that, right? At the beginning, they were all like, no, 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 we go with the facts. But then at the end of the day, people need to win votes, right? And people need to get elected, so that's fair.
I'm going to quote from John Lawrence. You wrote this, John. With a federal election possibly coming as early as March and certainly by the fall, you wrote this back in February, Tory, who as mayor is officially designated to manage intergovernmental relations, he'll have to figure out what kind of role he's prepared to play in this exquisitely important campaign. Besides the policy advocacy Tory oversaw during his civic action days, there's little on his resume to indicate how he'll manage the politics. Just, we got a few minutes left here. Go into that a bit more. What's your concern about how he's going to manage things as we come up towards what will now almost certainly be an October federal election?
I think that mayors have two options in terms of how they interact with the other orders of government. One is that they can be kind of use it as a bully pulpit and kind of provoke them. And you know, we saw David Miller did that later in his term. Mel Lastman did that at certain points in his term. And then there are others who believe that you should do it sort of, you know, more collegially, and Mayor Tory is firmly in the latter camp. When Joe Oliver brought down the federal budget a couple weeks ago, you know, Mayor Tory was very quick off the mark to praise the federal government for the infrastructure money that was allocated, which was not really enough.
$1 billion for public transit over a long period of time.
For the whole country.
For the whole country. Yep.
So, and I thought, well, that sounds to me like kind of a partisan, you know, he's kind of giving them a little bit of partisan support. I believe that mayors should never be satisfied with what they're going to get from the other orders. And he seems to me to be somebody who's too easily satisfied because he has these backroom connections.
Am I out of time? I'm out of time. Can I thank our three panelists for coming in tonight? Our three guests, John Lawrence from Spacing Magazine, Adil Burali, also from Spacing, and Jonathan Goldsby from Now Magazine. It's good to have you three here in TVO tonight.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.